And welcome back, folks. Today we take a closer look at the Old World Enger Tower and surrounding park in Duluth, Minnesota, supposedly built in 1939. And quoting directly from Duluth's Grand Old Architecture by Tony Dearkins, "One lifelong bachelor, Bert Enger, died in 1931. At the age of 68, he left 2/3 of his estate to Duluth to develop the Grand Mountain area of West Enger Park Golf Course. All of the property was purchased with money Enger had donated in 1921. He specified that the new park should include a lookout tower surrounded by beautified grounds and footpaths to accommodate tourists. In 1933, the park's highest point was selected as the tower's location, and the following year, Grand Mountain was rededicated as Enger Park. A stone comfort station was built in 1935, and 2 years later, workers from the National Youth Administration, a branch of the Works Progress Administration, that focused on providing work and education for Americans between the ages of 16 and 25, built rock benches, stone pathways, and steps, campfire sites, and outdoor ovens. Construction of the tower began in late 1937, based on a design by architect A.R. Melander. His initial drawings called for a 6-story tower with a cross-gabled roof and an elaborate entrance. A second design looked similar to the final design, although it stood several stories shorter. The final design envisioned an octagonal tower, 5 stories high, faced with multi-colored native gabbro gathered on site. Unglazed, segmental arch window openings look out in every direction. At its peak, 531 feet above sea level, workers installed a green light that could be seen for miles. By 1939, the tower stood complete, paid for with funds provided by the Enger estate. Crown Prince Olaf of Norway and his wife Princess Martha traveled to Duluth in June to dedicate the tower to the memory of Bert Enger. A crowd of 5,000 gathered to hear speeches by the Norwegian royals and other dignitaries. The headline stated that the royals, quote, captivated Duluthians by informality. The prince expressed pride in the way that the Norwegian immigrants had influenced Duluth and, indeed, all of America. Enger is truly a Norwegian name. As the princess and I have traveled about your country, we have been greatly pleased to note the recognition that has been accorded to American men and women of Norwegian birth and Norwegian ancestry, end quote. In none of the literature or any of the signage is there any mention of a buried floor that is blocked off, as you see here. What is this floor? How deep does it really go? And what purpose could this possibly have? And all of these stone arches definitely have an old world feel. So who was this Bert Enger? And quoting from Zenith City, a postcard perspective by Tony Dearkins, born March 24th, 1864, in Hamar, Norway, Hagbert Bert J. Enger came to America in 1877 along with his maternal grandparents. His mother stayed in Norway. His father is thought to have abandoned the family. The 13-year-old immigrant found work on a farm in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. Later jobs took him to Wisconsin sawmills, Dakota wheat fields, and the iron mines of northern Minnesota and Michigan's Upper Peninsula. He later settled in Pine City, Minnesota, where he purchased half interest in a general store. According to Enger family historian Jim Insbell, the store, quote, was a bad experience for several years due to old and shop-worn merchandise. He eventually was able to pay off all debts, and he and his partner split the store, with Hagbert taking the hardware and furniture part of the business. Enger then hired Emil Olson, a native of Minnesota's Chippewa County, to work in the store while Enger made sales calls to farmers. Recognizing that the market was too small for the business to survive, Enger and Olson, now partners, decided to try their luck in Duluth, Minnesota. In 1903, with less than $500 worth of furniture as stock, the pair moved to Duluth and set up shop in West End as Enger and Olson. Within a year, they had moved to 2012 West Superior Street, right between two larger furniture stores. Surrounded by competition, their business thrived. 2 years later, they had to rent additional space. 3 years later, they needed more space, so they built a warehouse at 1872 West Michigan Street, which stands today and still bears the name Enger and Olson Incorporated. Insbell writes that the business prospered because, quote, they were complementary to one another. Enger was cautious and conservative, and Olson was enthusiastic and impulsive. Enger was slow of speech, deliberate and retiring. Olson was quick in speech and action and enjoyed being in the public eye. In essence, the two men formed a perfect partnership, and they used an intermediary, a friend, very effectively when unable to agree on something. Both were extremely honest, intelligent, and loyal. Olson died in 1926. Enger never married. He lived with his Uncle Bert and Aunt Pauline Enger and their daughter Cornelia in an apartment on the store's third floor. In 1928, he was installed as the fifth member of the Duluth Hall of Fame. On April 5, 1931, Enger suffered a stroke while in Hawaii and died 3 days later. Insbell claims Enger's remains are interred within Enger Memorial Tower, but that has never been verified. Ah, and here must be some of the stairs that all the youths put in. These things are giant, folks, all kidding aside. How would kids be trucking these around and putting miles of these in? And don't forget about the giant cut stones randomly lying around the gardens. Could these really be ruins? And the story of Enger's life really doesn't seem to make sense. This man was an independently wealthy furniture salesman who was able to travel all around the Midwest in the late 1800s, but then he had some love affair with the royal family from the country which he fled, and yet had all this money to hand over to this city, never got married, and lived in an apartment with his relatives while being independently wealthy. Something doesn't seem to add up. What do you folks think? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And let me leave you with some beautiful views of Duluth, Minnesota, Enger Park, and Lake Superior. Thanks again for watching, folks. Please like, share, and subscribe.